tonight, at some point, the room around you will go completely quiet, and without thinking, you'll reach for your phone. You won't even know why. You'll just feel it, this small automatic pull toward noise, toward something, anything. That reflex is new, historically new. For 99.9% of human history, silence wasn't something to escape. It wasn't empty. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the default state of being alive. And your ancestors didn't just tolerate it. They built their entire inner world inside of it. But modern humans almost never truly experience silence anymore. Not real silence. The kind where the only sound you hear is the sound of your own thoughts forming. So what happens to a mind that never gets quiet? And what did silence actually give the people who had no choice but to sit inside it? The answer changes everything we think we know about focus, memory, and what your brain is actually doing when you think it's doing nothing. Let's start with what silence actually is, because most people have it wrong. We tend to think of silence as the absence of sound, a gap, a pause between things that matter. But neuroscience tells a very different story. When your environment goes quiet, your brain doesn't go quiet with it. It activates. Not idle, not resting, activated. Researchers at the University of Oregon discovered that the brain's default mode network, the system that handles self-reflection, memory consolidation, and future planning, becomes significantly more active in silence than during any task-focused state. In other words, the moments when you're not doing anything are the moments your brain is doing some of its most important work. Your ancestors sitting around a dying fire staring at nothing weren't wasting time. They were processing, integrating, becoming. We took that away from ourselves, and we didn't replace it with anything better. We replaced it with constant, low-grade noise. Podcasts at half speed, notifications every 9 minutes, music we don't really listen to. And the cost of that trade is something most people can feel but can't name. For over 300,000 years, the hours between sunset and sleep were almost entirely silent. There were no trains passing in the distance, no hum of air conditioners, no ambient urban drone, just the sound of wind, water, animals, and other people breathing nearby. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer communities, societies that still live without electricity, have documented something remarkable about those evening hours. They're not passive, they're not boring, they're some of the most cognitively rich hours of the entire day. People tell stories, long winding stories with no particular point. They describe dreams. They sit with thoughts they haven't had time to finish during the busyness of daylight. They ask each other questions that don't have answers. They think out loud, together, and alone. This is what silence made possible. Not emptiness, depth. The kind of thinking you can only do when nothing external is competing for your attention. Philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote this in the 1600s, and it might be one of the most uncomfortable true things ever said. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He wrote that before smartphones, before television, before radio. He saw it happening even then, this ancient instinctive flight from the interior. Here's what's actually happening when you're never quiet. Every time you hear a sound, any sound, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, runs a quick check. Is this dangerous? Is this relevant? Should I respond? It does this thousands of times a day. And even when it concludes the sound is harmless, that check consumes resources, cognitive resources, the same resources you need for focus, creativity, and emotional regulation. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology found that people who experienced regular periods of silence showed measurably lower cortisol levels, improved working memory, and significantly higher scores on tests of creative problem-solving, compared to people exposed to constant ambient noise, even noise they reported as pleasant. Pleasant noise still costs you. The brain doesn't care if you enjoy it. There's also something called directed attention fatigue, a state where your capacity to consciously focus becomes depleted. Silence is one of the only documented ways to restore it. Not sleep, not breaks, silence specifically. Which means every time you swap silence for background noise, You're spending attention you don't have and borrowing from a capacity that's already in overdraft. You are not resting when you fill silence with sound. You are working, and you're doing it without knowing it, and without getting paid for it. So what happens if you stop running from it? A research team at Duke University discovered something that no one expected. They were studying the effects of music on the brain, and between the pieces they included 2-minute silent intervals as controls, neutral gaps, nothing of interest. Except the silent intervals weren't neutral at all. They produced the highest rates of new neuron growth in the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for learning and memory, of anything else in the entire study. The silence outperformed the music. It outperformed the stimulation. It outperformed everything. The brain doesn't just tolerate silence, it craves it. In the studies of people who regularly practice extended silence, whether through meditation, contemplative prayer, or simply time alone and quiet, one pattern appears again and again. They report a dramatically different relationship with their own thoughts. Not fewer thoughts, not more peaceful thoughts, just a different relationship, a sense of watching thoughts rather than being pulled along by them, a feeling that they are the one choosing where attention goes rather than attention choosing for them. That shift, that small, fundamental shift, is what your ancestors had by default, and what we've almost entirely lost. Tonight, when the room goes quiet, notice what you reach for first, and ask yourself, what are you trying not to hear? Because that reflex, that automatic lurch toward noise, isn't random. It's protecting you from something. Maybe from the thought that's been waiting to finish itself for weeks. Maybe from a question you've been too busy to ask. Maybe from nothing at all, except the strange, unfamiliar weight of your own presence. Your ancestors didn't have the luxury of escape. The dark came every night, and it came for hours, and there was nowhere else to go. So they went inward, and inside that darkness, they built language, story, memory, self. You don't need to go dark for hours, but the research is clear, and so is the history. The people who allow silence into their lives think more clearly, feel more fully, and know themselves more honestly than those who don't. Not because silence is magical, but because you are the one thing that only reveals itself when everything else goes quiet. So try it, not as a practice, not as a technique, just as an experiment. 10 minutes, no sound, no phone, no background, anything. See what shows up. If something in this video landed differently than you expected, I'd like to know what it was. Leave it in the comments. Just a few words is enough. I'll see you in the next one.